Kieran, good morning. It's morning for you,
Good,
not evening. I have
yeah,
to
good
be
morning,
careful
Louise.
about. Yeah, good morning. So very briefly, Kieran, it's wonderful to have you here. Kieran is a freelance, award-winning writer, speaker, trainer. He's been collaborating with Macmillan for many years now. He's the author of video material for Macmillan English Hub, the course for adults here in Spain. And today he's going to talk to us about bringing lesson outcomes to life. So all yours, Kieran.
Okay, thank you very much, Louise, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for attending the session today. I am in the center of Barcelona. I'm about 5 minutes from the Sagrada Familia. It's a bit of a cloudy day today. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be talking about lesson outcomes, and I'm going to go straight into it. And what I'm going to do is to pose the question, what are lesson outcome, and to find out what you know about lesson outcomes. I will give you an overview of the session afterwards, but for the moment, we're just going to find out your knowledge, your prior knowledge of lesson outcomes. So we're just going to do a short poll, and we've got 4 options there, and obviously there is no right or wrong option. It's just your what your existing knowledge. So you've got those options there. If you would be kind enough just to choose one of those options, please.
Great. Yes, the
So you've
poll
got,
is on your screen. Exactly. What are lesson outcomes? You've got 4 options. I've never heard of lesson outcomes before. I've heard of lesson outcomes, but not really sure what they are. I've heard of lesson outcomes and have a reasonable idea of what they are. And I've heard of them and I'm completely sure what they are. Now, the answers are coming in quickly, very quickly, and we seem to have quite similar. At the moment, the majority are saying, I've never heard of lesson outcomes before, 38%, but that might change.
okay.
Followed by, I've heard of lesson outcomes and have a reasonable idea of what they are. Followed by, I've heard of lesson outcomes and I'm completely sure what they are. Finally, I've heard of lesson outcomes, but I'm not really sure what they are. So yes, I think we can close it at 35% saying I've never heard, followed by 25% I have a reasonable, followed by not
Okay.
really sure and sure
Yeah.
what they are.
Okay, that's
Okay,
great to
thank
know.
you.
That's pretty much what I expected. So that's good. That's good to know. That's fantastic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a definition. This is our working definition of lesson outcomes. I'll give you a moment to look at that. And as you can see, the keywords are in bold there. So essentially, the lesson outcomes are measurable, observable, and specific statements that indicate what a student should know and be able to do at the end of a lesson. So it's very much about what the student is able to do at the end of the lesson, end of the teaching activity. And so lesson outcomes are focused and centered on the actual intended learning, not on the specific activities and not on the resources. Okay, so to help us there, what I'm going to do is to give an overview of this session and what the learning outcomes of this webinar are. So at the end of this webinar, teachers will be able to write their own effective lesson outcomes. Okay, that's one fundamental outcome there. At the end of the webinar, you will be able to identify and adapt the lesson outcomes in a course book to meet the needs of your students and teaching context. Now, and I think this is vitally important because the vast majority of teachers here today will be working, teaching many hours with perhaps with large groups, mixed ability groups. To start from zero without having any resources, any support, it can be very time consuming. So my recommendation is to teachers is to use their course book and to adapt the outcomes, which are very often explicitly stated now in the course book, to your students and your teaching context. Okay, I was a full-time teacher for 30 years. I used the course book in all of those 30 years, and they helped me enormously, and they helped my students enormously with the learning outcomes and with the students learning. By the end of the webinar, you'll be able to effectively communicate these lesson outcomes to your students. So it's vitally important that once we have our lesson outcomes, we communicate these to our students. And also that at the end of the webinar, you will be able to activate your students' schema, their background knowledge, their prior knowledge about specific lesson outcomes and the themes of the lesson outcomes. And finally, that you will be able to involve your students in the assessment of the specific lesson outcomes, okay? To actually involve your students in deciding, in evaluating whether learning has actually taken place, okay? So that's a little bit of an overview of the session, what we're going to be doing. And this is a question here: what ought to be the predominant outcome of an English language lesson? So we have another poll here, which I've got two polls right at the beginning here. So, and notice the question: what ought to be the predominant outcome of an English language lesson? So we've got those four options: to guide linguistic change in students, to guide cognitive change in students, to guide effective change in students, or to guide linguistic, cognitive, and effective change in students. So when you've got the poll there, if you'd be kind enough to choose the option. On the first poll, that I said there's no right or wrong answer, I would say with this poll, there is a right answer. There is one right answer, I would say, just to give you a clue there.
Yes, and the answers are coming in. Thank you, people, for writing in. We seem to have a majority at the moment saying number 4, to guide linguistic, cognitive, and affective change in students.
Okay,
it's over 90%.
That's okay. And yes, I would say that that is definitely the right answer. If the question is what ought to be the outcome of an English language, but here with the predominant is the most important. So what I would say here, and I agree with you absolutely, and the research and the literature backs it up, that we should guide linguistic, cognitive, and affective change. But as English language teachers, it should be the primary, but not the only outcome, should be to affect change in our students' linguistic ability. So students, so the main outcome should be that students learn language or skills which then can transfer to other genres, situations and topic. This should be the main one. But you're absolutely right that the cognitive and the affective change are important as well. And this is what I said. What I say here: the aim of English lessons is to guide linguistic, cognitive, and affective change, but primarily linguistic change. But cognitive change is obviously vital, and effective change, I would say, is absolutely vital. And after the pandemic and post-pandemic education, this affective factor, social emotional intelligence factor, is increasingly important. So your answer there is correct there. So just one more thing: what different types of lesson outcomes are there? Okay, I think we've got a little bit of a clue in what we've looked at before. So perhaps if we just think in terms of this might be with if we're thinking in terms of language, for example, or skills. Are there any ideas there that what type of outcomes we might want to focus on?
Okay, so that's a have your say. And this is a question,
Yes.
it's on your screen. What different types of lesson outcomes are there? We'll give you a couple of seconds to write in answers. You just need to write in short answers for this. I presume, well, I'm not going to answer it, Kieran, but I presume that there are different kinds of outcomes. I think, Kieran, are you there?
I am, yes.
Yes, yes. I think there are different kinds of outcomes, and people are saying being able to perform a particular linguistic function. So
Okay,
linguistic
fantastic. So a function,
outcomes.
absolutely, that's great.
Mm-hmm. We'll just
Was
see
there
if a
anything on
couple more
skills there?
come.
Did anyone mention skills?
Yes, to master a particular skill. That's
Okay,
been
fantastic. Yeah.
mentioned.
Okay, fantastic. That's great.
Okay.
That's great. Okay, so those are two great answers there. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so the literature tells us that there are three main types of outcomes. The language outcomes of grammar, vocabulary, and functions. Functions was mentioned there. And the skills are outcomes of reading, listening, speaking, writing as well. But also, in increasingly important, these life skills, social and emotional intelligence, empathy, which is an area I'm particularly interested in. And this, as I mentioned before, the importance of social and emotional intelligence in post-pandemic education is increasingly important as well. Okay, so those three main things there. Okay, and just before we move on to the main part of the talk, just one final have your say. How do lesson outcomes benefit both teachers and students? So this is a have your say. So if you'd be kind enough just to write a short sentence about any of the benefits for teachers and students of having these very clear statements about what students will be able to do by the end of the lesson.
Okay, again, that's on your screen. The question, how do lesson outcomes benefit both teachers and students? And please write in your answers here, short answers. Yes, I think, Kieran, they obviously do benefit both teachers and students, and people are saying objectives, we can see that our objectives are achieved as a guide to
Absolutely
advance in
fantastic.
their learning. It keeps the lesson on task and on track, I
Absolutely,
imagine,
that's a fantastic answer as
eliminating
well.
exactly eliminating material that is not useful in the outcome. You can see,
Excellent.
you can all see how well you're doing. That's important guide to planning for the
Yes,
teacher,
formative
enable students to
assessment,
see where they're
fantastic.
going. Yeah, teachers need to focus on class aims more, and students know what they've got out of the lesson. Takeaways, that is, gives both time to
Absolutely.
reflect and think about how to progress in the coming lessons. Excellent. Thank you, everybody.
These answers are fantastic. They're much better than my answers. Okay, they're absolutely fantastic. And this is 100% what the literature tells us about this. Five main benefits. We'll go through them very, very quickly because we haven't got that much time, but it's exactly what you've said there. So I'm delighted there. So um, having the outcomes, these lesson outcomes, allows this clarity of purpose, which is one of the things you mentioned, enables a predictive focus on student learning. So there's a clear focus to each lesson, which is one of the things that you said there. Okay, for clarity, absolutely. That's the first thing. So the second one, which is you mentioned as well, it allows learning to be staged and sequenced. So a learning outcome of one lesson can be connected to the next one, and we can build upon that, and that can be integrated by students. So it's very clear for students what they're learning and in what sequence. Then the third advantage, and you mentioned it again, the assessment of the intended learning is easier and it can be more precise because we have these clear statements, we've clear of the outcomes, we've communicated this to our students. So this means it's easier for us and for our students to assess. Okay. And the fourth advantage is this about the internal coherence in a lesson. So that these lesson outcomes are the drivers of the lesson. not the resources, not the materials, these outcomes. This is fundamental. And the fifth is also the fact that some people say, oh, but having these lesson outcomes, this limits flexibility and creativity. But this couldn't be further from the truth. They don't prevent prevent flexibility or creativity. And if we think that an individual teacher may teach a lesson with exactly the same learning outcomes in completely different ways. So they do allow for flexibility and creativity. So those 5 main advantages there. Okay, now what we're going to do now is to look at how to identify and write learning outcomes for a lesson. And these are the 2 main factors the research tells us that we should be focused on, that we should bear in mind. Now, many of you will have heard of this backwards planning, which is an absolutely fundamental concept. So it's to start, when you start planning a lesson, you start with your ultimate objective in mind, your end goal, and then you work backwards from there to develop your plan. Okay, so identifying and writing specific lesson plans helps teachers in this backwards planning. Okay, so when we plan a class, we should start from the lesson outcome so that the specific activities and materials can be planned to meet each lesson outcome. Okay, so the fundamental thing is that the lesson outcomes direct the planning, not the activities and the materials and the resources, which is often what happens. So the lesson outcomes direct the planning, they drive the lesson. Okay, and then the other thing that we should bear in mind when writing lesson outcomes is that the lesson outcomes should state aspects of language, cognition, and affect. As we mentioned at the beginning of the session, lesson outcomes, the aim of English lessons is to guide linguistic change, cognitive change, affective change in our students. So therefore, the lesson outcomes should state principally aspects of language, cognition, and affect rather than behavior. Okay, the focus on the is on the learning rather than the materials and the activities. And to help us do that, to focus on the language of cognition, the linguistic and the affective, we can use verbs from Bloom's taxonomy. So in the cognitive linguistic domain, we can use the verbs like categorize, identify, contrast, describe, compare. In the affective domain, we can use things, verbs like appreciate, defend, appraise, critique. This will help us to use these action verbs here. Now, so we'll look at some concrete examples of lesson outcomes. By the end of the lesson, students will be able to categorize words by using the prefixes re, in, and un. So we have a linguistic outcome here, specifically a vocabulary outcome here. Notice the use here of will, that when we're writing these outcomes, it's best to use the modal verb will rather than ought to or should or have to or must. To avoid any sort of moral obligation, just say will, this thing will happen. Okay, we can move on to another one to say students will be able to write and explain cause and effect by employing connectors such as consequently, therefore, and as a result. Another one on pronunciation. By the end of the lesson, students will be able to pronounce and accurately pronounce the short I-O and long O-U, such as in found, vowel sounds. Okay. Okay. And we also have this one, by the end of the lesson, students will be able to distinguish similarity and difference through the use of comparative and superlative adverbs in an article. So we have the linguistic one of grammar, of comparative and superlatives, but also the skill of reading as well. Okay. Now, so we've looked at there what lesson outcomes are, why they're important, how we can write them. This is a vital part. how to identify and adapt lesson outcomes in a course book. When I was researching this article, I looked at course books over the last 30 years. That's the time that I've been a teacher. 30 years ago, there was virtually no mention of lesson outcomes or lesson objectives in the course book that very explicitly stated. It wasn't very explicitly stated. Even 20 years ago, this wasn't the case. 10 years ago, I would say that there was a move towards a much more explicit explanation and presentation of lesson outcomes in the course books. And now what we find is that in course books that there is a very clear and very explicit explanation of the outcomes and a presentation of the outcomes. And I'm going to refer to Macmillan English Hub, which is a book I was involved in. I wrote the video book activities. And what we have here, we're just going to go through very quickly how the lesson outcomes in a course book are presented. In a very modern, very up-to-date course book are presented, and we're going to go through different levels from beginners to intermediate, upper intermediate, advanced, but I'm going to go through it quite quickly because it's the same approach at all the levels. Okay, so what we have here, first of all, in the opening page, the first page of each unit, we have a spectacular image, an eye-catching image, which is related to the topic of the unit, and in some ways the image is related to the outcomes. And then we have we have some discussion questions to activate the students' prior knowledge, their background knowledge, which is something that Amanda mentioned, using with images as well. So discussion questions: where do you live? The topic of the unit is a place to live. Look at the picture. Is this a good place to live? Why not? Complete the sentence in your own words. Life in a big city is dangerous because. Life in a big city is difficult because. So we're introducing the theme here of describing a place. Okay, so we're activating the student's schemata, which is vitally important. Then on this opening page, we have very explicitly what the outcomes or even the objectives are. So we have: describe your city or town, describe your home, ask for and give directions, write a review of a cafe. Now, what I would recommend here is that students write sentences such as: by the end of this lesson, I will be able to describe my town or city. By the end of the lesson, I will be able to describe my home. By the end of the lesson, I will be able to ask for and give directions. By the end of the lesson, I will be able to write a review. Now, the theory behind this is that this cognitive shift from you will be able to I is quite significant. It gives, and also the affective shift to the first person singular is quite significant affectively as well, and cognitively as well. And it seems to give students more ownership over the outcomes or the objectives as well. So I would recommend again that the students write the outcomes there, and the fact that they've written are very explicit. It's at the beginning of the unit, and this will help students to guide students to know where they are in their learning process. Okay, so we have exactly the same principle again at intermediate level. Here we have the interesting eye-catching image, but again it's connected with the theme experiences. Okay, but also we have a quote here which is related to the theme. Read the quote. What do you think it means? Nothing is a waste of time if you use the experience wisely. So we're introducing the theme of experience, but activating students' schemata. Tell your partner about experiences you've had that were incredible, eye-opening, thrilling. Okay, so again, we're introducing the theme of the unit, but also the outcomes. And then we have the outcomes expressed very explicitly here. So, and again, students could say, write sentences at the start saying, at the end of the lesson, I will be able to talk about a life-changing experience. By the end of the lesson, I will be able to talk about solving a problem. By the end of the lesson, I will be able to write an informal email. This gives the students more ownership, more agency over their learning. And again, just going up to intermediate level, the same principle again, an interesting image. The theme is future. They have the quote about the future where the students would discuss, and then students discuss questions such as, are you generally optimistic or pessimistic about the future of the world? So again, we're activating the student schemata, introducing the theme of the unit, but also introducing very subtly the outcomes. And again, the questions, the outcomes here. Again, I would recommend that students write by the end of the lesson. I will be able to make predictions about the future of the work. By the end of the lesson, I will be able to debate a range of transport proposals. By the end of the lesson, I will be able to write a for or against blog post. Again, this gives students ownership of the outcomes and more agency in their learning, and exactly the same principle at advanced level. Okay, so we just look at advanced level there. We have this spectacular image there, and look at the picture. Why do people put themselves in extreme situations? We've got the introduction of extremes, which is the topic of the unit, but also related to the outcomes. Okay, and then discussion questions to activate their schemata. Do you prefer extreme experiences or say predictable ones? Why not? Okay, and then the objectives. Again, we can get students to write their own objectives. By the end of the lesson, I will be able to describe reactions to extreme experiences. By the end of the lesson, I will be able to discuss extreme jobs. By the end of the lesson, I will be able to write a cover letter for a job. Okay, so again, students, by writing these sentences in the first person, are gaining more ownership of the outcome and more agency over their learning. Okay, so just a final question here in Have Your Say. How can we involve our students in the process of assessment of lesson outcomes? How do we know whether students have actually achieved the lesson outcomes? How do we know that learning has actually taken place? So I think this is a vital stage to do this. Would you be kind enough to just say what you do or any ideas that you might do?
Okay, again, the question is on your screen. How can we involve our students in the process of assessment of lesson outcomes? We'll give you a couple of seconds to write in your answers, short answers. Don't need to write full sentences. And yes, we've got an answer, exams. Okay, providing them with
that's one way of doing it. That's one way of doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Providing them with quick feedback.
Quick feedback, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm thinking, well, I'm thinking out loud. I like to give answers as well. Can I give an answer?
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking of
Absolutely.
I don't know, because you're talking about personalizing, giving students agency and ownership. So
Yes.
the question of self-assessment, the question of peer assessment,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Traditionally, when you were talking about 30 years ago, 20 years ago, when there weren't any lesson objectives clearly identified in course books, in terms of assessment, it was definitely a one-way process, wasn't it?
Yes.
The teacher assessed, and usually it was in the form of a kind of an official kind of exam or test situation.
Yeah.
So I would suggest perhaps self and peer, and more answers, just a couple. Personalize a task and use peer assessment when they can explain what they have learned. That's actually a very important point. When you can explain something in your own words, paraphrase, then you really do demonstrate your understanding. Writing vocab quizzes for each other, for example, fill in the blanks with the correct grammar.
That's great.
Self-assessment tests, let them do something meaningful in their own lives. like writing
Yeah.
something on social media. That's a really nice one. Finding
Fantastic. Yeah,
online
that's
materials related to the topic. In evidence, it may not be immediately apparent. Evidence of learning may appear over subsequent classes. So the idea of formative
okay.
assessment. That's, I mean, these are
Formative
great answers.
assessment there. Excellent,
Wow.
excellent. Yeah, those are great answers. Fantastic. So I very much like to think about the feedback, the peer assessment, formative assessment. It's very much what the literature says. So those are great answers again. Fantastic. Okay, so obviously the individual students play a fundamental role in the process of assessments, evaluating whether the lesson outcomes have really been achieved, whether learning has taken place or not. Okay, so, and this, according to the research, can be done through ways. The ongoing dialogue with the teacher, which is this feedback, which you refer to there. This can be difficult with large classes and mixed ability classes, but it's vitally important. And the one, but this that you've mentioned through discussion with each other, so they're able to share, compare, and combine their ideas. I think this is perhaps the most interesting area. Okay, but this ongoing dialogue between the teacher and student is fundamental. Okay, so teachers have to try to plan opportunities to speak to individual students or to small groups to check on their progress in achieving learning outcomes. And we'll just go through this here, giving students feedback regularly to help them move their learning forward. Okay, and we'll look at that. And probably from my own experience as a teacher and looking at the research, when I researched this, is helping every student to produce some form of evidence showing what they've learned. And this evidence can be written or spoken, and this helps both the student and the teacher to check and consolidate the learning. Okay, so some form of evidence, either written or spoken, to show what they've learned, which is, when you're talking about paraphrasing, it's related to this. Now, one way of doing this is through, and this is one of my favorites, is a review of learning at the end of a lesson, or perhaps at the end of each lesson, where students discuss questions related to the lesson and the learning outcomes. And here we have an example. So at the end, students individually, they do this individually, they make notes, then they compare in a small group with their classmates. What did you learn from the lesson? What new vocabulary did you use? What new functions did you use? What new grammar did you use? What did you enjoy about the lesson? What did you find challenging? Okay, how would you like to, okay, what would you like to remember about the lesson? Okay, what will you remember about the what you've learned? So this review of learning can be very, very effective, and I think this can be built into the classroom and become part of the classroom sort of culture of a formative assessment and self-assessment. Okay, another way, which many of you will already have heard of, which are exit tickets, which are having incredible success in the language classroom and in the Spanish language classroom as well, which are called billetes de salida. So these are specific questions or prompts about the lesson on a piece of paper, and the students have to respond to these questions or response and give the paper to the teacher before they can leave the classroom. So here we have an example here. The students write down 3 things that I've learned today, 2 things I found interesting, and something I still have a question about, something I'm not so sure about. Okay, this is really, really effective. Okay, so these provide the teacher with immediate feedback on how successfully students have achieved the outcomes, but they also identify specific gaps in understanding that can be addressed in the next class or subsequent classes. So it gives both the teacher and student immediate feedback on how effective the lesson outcomes have been and how effective learning has been. Okay, another example here. Today I learned, the students write down what they've learned. I may need more practice with. So students are reflecting on what gaps they may have. I have a question about, okay? Okay. And just finally, the last thing that we're just going to come to is, so we've looked at that about how the teacher can get this immediate feedback through a review of learning, these questions, and also through these exit tickets. We're going to look at one thing that we can do here for students working together. So this peer assessment, which you mentioned earlier, okay, and this can be done through discussions and cooperative learning activities such as think, pair, and share. And this helps students to share, compare, and combine their ideas. So we have an example here, a template here. So what I think about the lesson outcomes, what my classmates think, and what we will be sharing with the rest of the class. We'll look at a concrete example which will make it easier to understand. Okay, so if, for example, we have the specific lesson outcome, at the end of the lesson, students will be able to answer questions about past events in a narrative, which I think is an excellent lesson outcome, very specific. So what we could do here, we could ask the students to discuss the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, and why of the story. So we say, so what happened in the story? When did it happen? Who were the main characters? What did they do? Where did the story take place? Why did the characters do this? To understand all the parts of the story. So the students take a few minutes to make notes individually, to write their notes. Then they compare with their partner to check their answers of the 5 W's there, and then decide what they're going to share with the rest of the class. Okay, so this is definitely assessing if learning has taken place. So what's the topic or question is the 5 W's. So to sort of summarize the story, what do I do? What do I think? So the students put their answers to the questions of the what, where, when, why, and how. They compare with the partner, and then they decide what they're going to share with the rest of the class, and they share with the rest of the class. So this is very, very effective peer assessment as well, and also formative assessment here. Okay, so just the concluding thoughts here. So I'd say that I hope that I demonstrated lesson outcomes are fundamental to lesson planning and effective language teaching and learning. Okay, for them to be effective, to optimize the use of lesson outcomes, we need to share these lesson outcomes with our students at the beginning of the class, and hopefully to personalize them in the sense of, by the end of the lesson, I will be able to do this. And we also need to activate the students' prior knowledge about the topic of the outcomes, and to involve students in the assessment of the as we've seen with the use of the review of learning, with the use of the exit ticket, with the pair share activities as well there. And I'd just like to finish for you to actually do an exit ticket here on what you have learned from the webinar, to what we've done today. So perhaps 3 things, and this is a have your say, so you'll have the opportunity to write down some very brief answers here. So 3 things I've learned today, 2 things I found interesting, a question I still have, and perhaps the questions you still have, we can use in the Q&A part.
Yes, that's great. Yes, this is a perfect ending, Kieran, to apply what you're demonstrating. So everybody, please do write in your answers. 3 things learned today. Listen, if you don't have 3 things, you could put 2 things, or even one thing.
Or even one thing. Just one thing would be, because we don't have much time, obviously.
Exactly, and the same for 2 things I found interesting. If you have one thing, put it down. That's great. And one question I still have. If you don't have a question, you're not obliged to write one. But please do feel free to do so. So we'll just give people a couple of seconds to write in. I've certainly learned a lot. I think you've demonstrated very clearly how key this question is of clearly establishing lesson objectives and outcomes, planning backwards. This is something that I tried to do when I was teaching, particularly in the last years of my teaching, being aware of that and sharing those outcomes with the students and asking them to personalize them. So creating that cognitive and effective connection and involving them. I mean, that's so key. So we've got some answers. I've been reminded about the importance of exit tickets and different ways of using them. Love the idea of exit tickets. Nice reminder to try this. Importance of having clear outcomes before we plan the lesson, making it relevant to our students. I learned or was reminded to prepare the class from the goals backwards. I found the exit tickets really interesting. No questions, just thank you. That's lovely. Thank you. How important it is to set objectives, planning backwards. So I think everybody agrees, or most people agree, Kieran, that really this is a fundamental question. It's not something that we should take for granted, and it's something that we need to include in all our lessons. And the idea, I think it's key as well to share those with the students. It's something, maybe it's a step that is missing or has been missing in the past, definitely sharing with our students so that they know exactly what's going on and what's expected of them and are totally involved. So that's fantastic. So thank you very, very, very much, Kieran, for that very insightful talk. I'm going to now ask my colleague, Kieran, you will go off, but you'll come back at the end. I'm going to ask my colleague, Lucy Thisaway, to come on screen now. Hi, Lucy. Hello.
Hi. How are you doing?
Hello. Yeah, no, good. All well here. So Lucy is an ELT specialist, and she's going to talk to us in more detail about Macmillan Education materials for private language schools or academies. So all yours.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting, actually. I seem to not have any control over the presentation at the moment, so I can't actually move it on. Maybe I have now. Let's see. Now, okay, that's great. So that was really interesting. Some of the points raised by both Amanda and Kieran there I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to let you know a little bit more in detail about the Ready For books that Amanda used some references from, and obviously she was authoring on there, and Macmillan English Hub, our course for general English for adults. Okay. So Ready For is now in its 4th edition. Okay, it's been working so well, obviously, over the years, and that's why it's in its 4th edition. We don't really make 4th editions of books if they're not demanded. So we're very happy. Many of you teachers out there will already have used this book in previous editions, possibly will or will have seen it on the bookshelf, possibly. If you haven't, we want to let you know a little bit about it today. It's a really kind of tried and tested course for B2 first preparation or C1 advanced preparation. Okay, so it's been going now for 20 years. It's in its birthday year this year for its 20th anniversary. And this brand new version of it is very up to date and obviously with a really nice fresh look. As you can see here from the unit opener, it actually doesn't even look like an exam prep book. When we open exam prep books, sometimes they can feel a little bit dry on the page. They can feel a little bit dry on the page and a little bit hard there. So, but actually, they're really lovely. This is a really lovely book. And you can see here we focus on the exam practice at the bottom, which parts of the exam are going to be looked at, and the speaking section. We're actually starting here with a speaking part 1, which is sometimes exam books forget this area, but it's an important part to practice this. So it's a really light entrance into the unit before we go into the hardcore exam practice. So what's new in Ready For? Well, there's lots of new, apart from the look and feel of it and that general kind of image wash, there's a lot of new content in here. Now, Amanda was talking about the pronunciation sections. Now, we all know that pronunciation, it's one of the skills that is tested within speaking, but sometimes we forget to focus on this. So we thought it was important to include a very clear pronunciation section within the book to not have to, bring it up as it going along. A lot of teachers prefer to just, okay, we'll concentrate on pronunciation of each individual student as we're moving along. But in the case of yes.
Yes, I'm just going to interrupt. Could you refresh your browser page?
My browser.
The camera just seems to be frozen. If you could just refresh.
How's that?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, well, I was frozen there, was I, for a while?
That's fine, no problem.
All right. Okay,
we heard you perfectly well.
Okay, brilliant. So as I was talking about the pronunciation sections, so we decided to make this a kind of fundamental part of each unit instead of just dealing with it as it comes up in the classroom. These are actually really fun activities as well, concentrating on different parts of pronunciation throughout there, but then actually coming into a game type activity at the end, which makes pronunciation a bit more of a fun task to do in class. It's obviously an area that a lot of students have kind of fossilized pronunciation errors, so it's important to make it a fun activity within class. What else is new? The listening and reading tasks. Obviously, we've updated a lot of the readings. They often become obsolete quite quickly, readings within textbooks, so we need to update those quite regularly. But one thing we've really concentrated with Ready For is updating those listening tasks. Listening is one of the areas that course books for exam preparation, teachers often feel, well, it's easier in the course book than when they get to the exam. They do really well. So we've really upped our game here to make this a challenging activities, okay? The listening in here, what we've done is we've added more distractors, we've increased the speed, so they're being re-recorded at a faster speed, and we've also introduced a variety of regional accents. That's really important, that in the real world, students are going to be experiencing different accents and that we're not all speaking like the Queen. So that's something that we've included in there. One of the star points about the new Ready For is the Interleave Teacher's Book. Now, what is an Interleave Teacher's Book? On one side, you have the student's book of this teacher's book, so you don't need to carry two books around. You have the student's book with all of the answers written in there, okay? That saves you a lot of work of jumping from student's book to teacher's book and finding the answers and also doing the activities, especially in those C1 levels where some of the activities are pretty hard, and we have to make sure that we're giving the correct answers. Everything's already in there. And then on the other side of the book, you have the teacher's notes, okay? Maybe warmer hints or how to do this in class, but also for those teachers that are perhaps less experienced at exam type classes, they maybe haven't taught so many of these. It's got a huge amount of support on what's expected of them in each part of the exam, okay? Another section that was obviously in the older version and that we've maintained, but we've extended these grammar sections, are the Ready For grammar. So each section of the exam has a Ready For part at the back of the book. So Ready For listening, Ready For writing with model answers, and the Ready For grammar section has been extended. Now, this is great for those students in the ideal world. Every student that comes on a B2 course or a C1 course to prepare for an exam would already more or less have this level and they're just preparing for the exam style tasks. And we know that that's not true, and each student will have different needs. So with this Ready For grammar section, you can really help the students fill those gaps. So whatever the needs are of each of these students, you can help fill those gaps and make them feel confident that their grammar is up to scratch for the level that's expected of them. And then moving on to the digital support. So for students, we have a blended or a paper option. So you can have the paper book with the access to the app. Now, the app gives the students a huge amount of practice, not only for the unit, the language practice that they've been doing, but also for exam practice. You get mock exams on there, which they can practice on the go wherever they are. And for the teachers, you obviously have your teachers app, which for projection in class, you have the digital students book, you have a test generator, you have a homework tool where you can send students homework via the app, and plenty of assessment, mock exam type activities to prepare your students as well. So if you don't have ready for the new additions in your centre yet, please do get in touch with us and we'll be happy to send you over some sample copies. Now, moving on to Macmillan English Hub. This is our English course with that ranges from A1 all the way until C1. So we have 7 levels of the course. Kieran today has been talking a little bit about objectives, which really leads in nicely to Macmillan English Hub. One of the main key points about this book is how clear and coherent the objectives are. It's really important, as we know from today's session, to keep students on track, but it's also important for the teachers to be on track. So as teachers, sometimes we get misled within a lesson, and it's very important to kind of stay on track, where we're going, what our objectives are, and what we want to do by the end of the unit. Here, you can see that the objectives are stated very clearly at the beginning of the unit, but also on every page header. It couldn't be any clearer. What are we doing on this page? What are we trying to achieve? And I would suggest a little bit of self-reflection at the end, students coming back to this at the end of the unit and using it as a little checklist. Did I meet these learning objectives? Am I happy, or do I need to work in some area a little bit more on that? So that's a big part of Macmillan English Hub. Again, with the teacher support that we're offering, it has an Interleave teachers book with the same format as the Ready For Teachers book, answers that are written in the students book, and all of the key tips, hints, and advice, and extra activities for you to be able to do in class. It's a really communicative book. It's really important to get our students talking, and the amount of speaking opportunities that Macmillan English Hub has packed within it are incredible. So if you open any double-page spread of the book, you're going to see whether it's a grammar lesson or a vocab lesson or a reading lesson, you've got opportunities for speaking all the way throughout the book. But apart from that, you have the communication hub, you have some lovely speaking cards and speaking hubs dotted throughout the book. So it's a very communicative book, and it's one of the things that the feedback that we're receiving of the book, people are telling us that they like most about it. There's a huge amount of audiovisual content. So there's 2 or 3 videos per unit, depending on the level. You can see here that we have the functional language videos. These are in the Cafe Hub. And these are kind of little Netflix series where you follow the same characters throughout the book, and you can see their progress. And this lends its hands to practice on pronunciation, functional language, and there's a speaking task at the end of that. And also we have, this is the part that Kieran was involved in, the Guardian videos. This is a separate booklet which has works with each unit around one Guardian video. These are all authentic, very motivating documentary style videos, and very scaffolded tasks to make sure that the students can understand this and get the most out of that. It also finishes in a lovely speaking activity as well. As well as Ready For, we also have the Students app, giving extra practice in all the areas of the language skills, which you can connect up to your teacher and find, and be motivated to see that you're going on the right track. You're not just learning, you're not just practicing here grammar and vocab. You're also getting the opportunity to practice speaking and writing within this application. And the teachers Here's what is available for the students. You have the blended solution of the student's book with or a digital student's book, whatever you prefer, but you always in both options will get access to the student's app. And for the teachers, you have your fully complete Teachers app, which gives you access to the digital student's book for projection in class or online class. You have the workbook and the e-planner. So that's it really. If you don't have any samples of this material and you would like to see some samples, please do get in touch with us and we'd be happy to send them out to you.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Lucy. That was very complete, very clear. And these are two very powerful courses ready for C1 Advanced and Macmillan English Hub. Fantastic. And now I'd like to welcome back on screen Amanda and Kieran. Hi there. Thank you. And thank you indeed, I mean, very much, Amanda, for staying up so late for this. We really, really appreciate it. But you look fresh as a daisy. You'd never think it was nighttime in New Zealand. And thank you so much for that wonderful talk, for that very, very important reminder that we teach and not just test, and that's key. And also Kieran for reminding us of the key importance of lesson outcomes, identifying those, sharing those with the students and planning backwards, and incorporating formative assessment and involving students at every stage in the process. I think it's been really motivating. And Lucy for that very complete and clear presentation. And to the audience for staying with us and being here this morning, this time of year, busy time of year for you all. I want to wish you all the very best for the end of the course, 2022. I was going to say 2023. It's not yet. We're still in 2022. And I want to remind everybody that we will send you an email in approximately 1 week's time with your certificate of attendance, with the handouts for both talks and the recordings. And now we're going to launch a SurveyMonkey questionnaire to get your feedback, as I mentioned at the beginning. Very important to hear your opinion about the event and your suggestions for future teacher training events, topics, please. And if you'd like to find out more about Macmillan English Hub or Ready for C1 Advanced, there's a question in there. Please reply. And please do go into the link, which takes you to our webpage for our materials for private language schools or academies. There's a link at the end of the questionnaire. So thank you. Thank you once again, Amanda, Kieran, Lucy, and everybody out there. And hope to see you again in a future edition. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.